Good afternoon. Awesome. It's great to see a packed room. It's awesome to have more people every year, so thanks for coming. My name is Jean-Michel Lemieux. I'm the VP of Engineering at Atlassian. So I had the pleasure of, leading and cheerleading all the teams that built all the fun stuff you saw in the keynote today. So the point of this panel is the Agile panel. Now, what's interesting, if you go from the keynote to today, there's a bunch of stuff that was skipped in keynote. So we talked about teams, we talked about all this fun stuff, but it's actually a lot of work to get that out. So the point of this panel was to dig in under the covers a bit more in terms of what it takes to take a lot of people, a lot of process, a lot of different ideas, and actually get software out. So we've brought on our panel a good kind of mix of experience to come and kind of share their experience as well, and we're going to be taking some questions at the end. So again, digging into the details about the realities of actually shipping a bunch of software every year. So I'll introduce our panel members. Super excited that they've all made it here. The first one is Justice from our office in Sydney. And Justice has the pleasure of being the engineering lead for the service desk team. So you've seen the launch of the service desk. So he's been with Atlassian for 5 years now, worked on Jira, and I think probably had the most exciting year of his last 5 years by spearheading, starting a new team up, and getting Jira Service Desk launched with, as you saw, a huge feature set. And I think there was 8 or 9 of you on that, so not a huge team to get started. To kind of complement that a bit more, we've got Steve Green from Twitter. I asked Steve how he wanted to be introduced, and he just said, just say Steve from Twitter. He does fun stuff. He's been, if you look at his background on LinkedIn, he's been at Salesforce, at Oracle. He's been, again, committing his career to helping software teams ship software for a long time. We have Tom K. I call him Tom K because he has a really long Polish name that I can't pronounce. So Tom has the pleasure, again, a bit of a different angle. He's the product manager of Jira Agile. So he has the luxury of hearing all the pains that people have with not just using the tool, but actually implementing Agile in their companies. How big is the Jira Agile team around?
8 or 9.
About 8 or 9 people. So again, we've got fairly small team structures at Atlassian within, you feed teams with 2 pizzas. We try and keep that going as well. And we have Colin Hillman, who's probably at the opposite spectrum, so Senior Director of, I think, Program Management and Development Tooling at JP Morgan and Chase. And I think you're saying that you have a team of about 9,000 developers that you're trying to, I think you said get in line, but I was like, you're trying to cheerlead, I think, from a tool and process perspective. So I think to kick things off and get to know you a bit more, I think the first question out of the boat is obviously, each of you gathered quite a lot of wealth in terms of leading teams, implementing software projects, and you've obviously used Agile kind of as your North Star. So when you have new people that come into your organization and you see them kind of following in your footsteps, what are the 3 tips that you give them so they can be successful in both implementing Agile and really, at the end of the day, just leading effective software teams? So why don't we start with Colin at the end?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to figure out why. What is it you're trying to do? What is Agile? I mean, I think it's hard for anybody to define it, but is it trying to release more frequently, or is it trying to raise the bar and quality of the software? When we look at in JP, we have tens of thousands of developers in all spectrums of the business prioritization and relationships, and so for every little team in there, there's something different. So that's the first thing. The second one is then really to know who you're working with. There's a lot of complexities and process and tooling, and you have to understand that it's not for everyone, right? So what works for one team may not exactly work for another. So it's really understanding who you're working with, and then third is to be agile and be willing to actually change and admit defeat and try different things, whether it's the tools they use or some of the kind of processes you're trying to implement. It's very much a try, fail, keep going at it until you reach that right balance with the developers and then the business that you're facing off to.
Okay, thanks. Tom, how about yourself?
Well, I would say the first thing that I would suggest to somebody who's starting is to understand that Agile is more of a cultural change than a process change. Especially people coming from waterfall, they get fixated over the acceptance criteria and the exact format of user stories. It's primarily about the culture, and it's this cultural shift. The second thing I would say is it's very easy to fall into the trap of incrementalism. Just because you deliver regularly doesn't mean you shouldn't have a vision, a long-term vision, and see where you're going and communicating it well and making sure you get there. Obviously, you change on the way. That's the whole point. But sometimes people seem to be lost in the details. And did you say 3 things?
I said 3, but you can be agile and change the scope on me.
I would say, no, there is a third thing, actually. I would say a lot of people seem to be lost in the point of estimation and focus on estimating in detail in hours and then improve the estimate's accuracy, etc. Whereas really the point is, what you want to know is how long will it take you to deliver X, or in this time frame, what can I possibly expect to deliver? So rather than fixating on that, just think of what you're actually trying to accomplish.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
What I would say is, so first of all, I would say just be prepared to be not liked. Be prepared to have people hate you, to throw barbs at you, because you're really causing them a lot of pain in some cases, right? People see change as something that's extremely painful, and it's actually very healthy for every organization to go through change, and those that don't obviously suffer from that. The second would be to embrace your skeptics. So typically what people will do is someone who's skeptical or doesn't believe in what you're talking about, the typical response is to run away from them and just avoid them and push them to the side. And my experience is really that you want to embrace them. The most skeptical people will end up being the greatest champions in the end. And this is some of my experience in Salesforce as well, is that the biggest skeptic we had when we did a transformation of the whole organization was the head of engineering. And he was the loudest one and the most influential, and he turned out to be the greatest advocate for it. And then probably the third is shared accountability. So typically a lot of teams or team members think, what's in it for me? And that certainly is important to talk to them about. But you really have to get them to a point where they believe that they're all responsible for everything that the team does, really focusing as a team instead of as an individual. And I think that's one of the toughest things to do. Certainly it's hard to do that at Twitter.
You're next, Justice.
I guess it's only me left. The first thing that I would say is don't try to iterate too soon. You wouldn't give up on a diet after 6 hours. You wouldn't try to learn French in a day. Like sometimes you have to stick at it for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months before you've given it a fair go. When the Jira Agile team was doing Kanban and Scrum in detail, they would spend 4 to 6 weeks really doing it to understand the process before they would try to make the small tweaks to it. So I'd say don't try to iterate too soon. But you do need to iterate, and that's the second one, because no process is perfect. Even if it's perfect at a point in time, circumstances change, and so you need to change the process to reflect those new circumstances. And that willingness to change is probably the best part of Agile for me. It's the acceptance that there's risk and uncertainty in life and embracing that instead of running away from it. And I would say the third thing is that at a pretty fundamental level, Agile is bullshit. Like, it's a means to an end, and the real end is shipping awesome software. And if Agile helps you do that, great. You can follow in the footsteps of some great organizations. And if it doesn't, well, don't tie yourself to a dead weight.
So Agile is a dead weight, is that Justice?
It
So
can't-
maybe that's
if
a
it's not working
good
for your
lead-in.
company,
So actually, I did a bit of homework preparing for the panel. I guess I had the luxury in my background that Dave Thomas, who was actually on the founding group of 8 or 9 guys who actually wrote the Agile Manifesto, was my boss for a while. I hadn't read the manifesto in a while, so I'm wondering if you guys did as a homework assignment for the panel. Do you guys know what? Okay, I know Justice may have done. Steve or Colin? No?
Yeah, I did. Well, I didn't reread it. I haven't read it in a long
Does it
time.
matter? Do you think it matters?
Personally, it doesn't matter to me. I feel like it's in my DNA, and it's sort of. I feel like I've sort of transcended beyond that, and teams, I think, should transcend beyond that. I think it's a really useful tool when you're getting started. But once you really sort of get this, to me, the manifesto doesn't matter as much. To me, it's more of a sort of a document, and the reality is, which I think you said, was it's all about shipping great software, and this is just another tool. So there were lots of different ways to look at how to be effective as a team, and so the manifesto is helpful, but I don't really read it much anymore.
Yeah, I think it gets back to what I was saying earlier about, trying to figure out what's right for the team at hand, and these principles of Agile. It's at the end of the day, it is bullshit in a lot of ways, right? It's just about creating quality software, and what we've tried to emphasize is the quality practices, whether it's the peer review mechanisms, and that's a real cultural shift for us in this ensuing demand of producing, keep producing the feature, the next feature to deliver to the business. It's hard to step back and say, well, if I just took a little bit longer, maybe I can make it so the next time I make a change on that same code base, it's a lot easier. So our big thing is not always just releasing more frequently. It's about releasing smarter, and so we don't get too torn up. Actually, I joined JP about a year ago, and at the firm they had this big agile transformation. They had this big machinery around this whole thing, and I said to everyone, we need a quality transformation. We don't need agile transformation. We don't need to worry so much about the mechanics of the meetings and the mechanics of the tools being used. And we need the mindset. We need the culture of people thinking about what it means to have quality software. So.
Okay, that's good. So you talked about like that cadence and that process. I was just, as I did a bit of my homework for the panel, I think one of the first sentences in the manifesto was about interaction and collaboration over process and tools. And as a tools vendor, I'm like, that kind of sucks. Like I should be consulting, but I think the point there was it's about people collaborating and talking and deciding what's important to them. But the fact is we have tools, and Agile has been defined by Scrum. It's almost a synonym. One of the things we've been struggling with at Atlassian is we do have teams where we're like, if we're going to have tools that implement Scrum, then we better really know how to do Scrum really well. And some of the habits in Scrum that we've seen ourselves adopting is it becomes very incrementalists. And I think Tom was mentioning that is it's all about the sprint, it's all about the MVP, it's all about like everybody almost looks at their toes a bit too much. So I'm curious from your perspective, how have you kind of brought innovation back into Agile, and how have you kind of I could beat down that almost that drum beat that people get in when they adopt the process and the tools over some of the other stuff. So whoever wants to jump in.
When I look back at the Agile manifesto, so there's the manifesto itself, which is maybe 4 sentences, and that's actually fairly uncontroversial, which I think is a symptom of there's sort of one in the marketplace of ideas. But then there's actually a second page, which is principles, and it talks in a little bit more detail backing up the first page. And one of the things I noticed on there is it talks about having a constant pace indefinitely. And when I read that, I'm like, that seems messed up, because that's not a sprint, that's a marathon, right? A constant pace indefinitely sounds like a marathon to me. And if you're in a marathon, where's the space for innovation, like you said? I think that's probably one of the biggest failings of people that adopt textbook Agile is they're expecting that constant velocity at all points in time. And I think you need to force yourself to take breaks. And that's the hardest part, is to build into your cadence of delivery where you take a step back. And maybe that's a dreaded offsite, or maybe that's you take 4 weeks of innovation time. But I think you need to actually build that into your company DNA so you don't get caught up into, I heard one presenter at a conference once call it story tyranny, where all you care about is getting the next story point done. And you have to figure out as a team how you're going to get out of that story tyranny. I think creating space built into the plan is a big part of it.
It's funny you mentioned MVP. So MVP comes from the Lean Startup movement. And a very good quote by Mark Suster on MVP was, Lean is very good in the beginning when you need to discover your market. But once you do, you need to get fat really, really fast, or else somebody else will. And I think it's a good thing to keep in mind that, once you get to MVP, it doesn't mean you're done and you can move on, because that really doesn't result in great quality products. So that kind of goes back to my previous point that you need to have this longer-term vision. And sometimes once you pass MVP, you need to carry on still.
Yourself, Colin, in the banking industry, in the finance industry, JP Morgan Chase, does the word innovation come up in the context of adopting Agile? And if so, what does that mean to you guys?
Well, I like to think of us as a very large software company. We have tens of thousands of developers, and our competitive advantage for a lot of our businesses is the technology, and it is all innovation. I mean, and how we actually deliver the mechanics of the software is another thing to me. So Agile doesn't, I don't think, facilitate or inhibit our ability to innovate, because if we're not innovating, we're going out of business. And so, again, I said earlier, I really think about these practices as just trying to raise the bar and whether we call it agile because that's the buzzword, then so be it. I'm not so bothered by it, but I really want people to focus on the bread and butter, the core things, the accountability, the ownership, and the totality of things. One of the things we're trying to do, which is, we're leveraging from the agile bit, is trying to get the same person to do many things. We've in the financial firms, there's been a lot of segregation of duties. We have heavily regulated, and there's all these things that we have to comply with, and a lot of times it's solved by, let's get somebody else to do it, right? And then that gives us this separation. But I'm trying to get away from that as much as possible, and whether it's testing and having the developers themselves be accountable, as I said, for that, and breaking down the barriers of where traditional QA organizations of maybe some manual testing or others. We want QA organizations that are, understand the business fully and understand technology enough. What we were having in experiences is QA people that were less technical and just answering to someone else's description of what the test case should be and whether they'd do it manually or they'd use some tool that would automate that. But they didn't really understand it. They weren't contributing to the process. They were just a machine, effectively. And so what we want to do is we want to raise that level of awareness and capability of our QA staff and make them smaller number, but make them much more influential and much more powerful. But at the same time, in the developers to use the tools that make them more productive, but deliver themselves more.
Okay. So I think I'm going to just pick on Steve for a bit because Twitter's been in the news a bit, and we talk about innovation. Twitter's at definitely a different spectrum of innovation, and I've heard rumors that it's a bit like the Wild West in Twitter. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is it an innovation problem or is it a process problem that you're trying to solve? And
well, I guess I wouldn't put either of those. I wouldn't say it's either one of those. I mean, the company obviously has challenges with process and other things because the company's grown really fast. So obviously we have a lot of very smart people at Twitter, and this was the same at Salesforce. But when you're growing really fast, sometimes it's hard to really understand what's happening across the entire organization, especially if you are in a bottom-up culture and you value the ideas of the individuals throughout the organization. It can be really difficult, especially at the executive level, to understand really what's happening within your own organization. So we're working on some of that. Some of that is tools, challenges, et cetera. But I think coming back to your original question, which was incrementalism versus sort of these big bets. And I think innovation comes from incremental development, without a doubt. It does come from that. But a lot of the disruptive big bets do not necessarily come from going from week to week and from 2-week sprints to 2-week sprints or month-long sprints, et cetera. So every time I've heard someone say, Agile doesn't work for innovation because we're just on a treadmill going from one week to the next, the problem that team always has is they have no strategy. They don't have a roadmap. So they have no vision beyond just a couple of sprints. So Agile, to me, is a very effective mechanism to be able to innovate, to be able to move and operate effectively as a team itself, and it allows you essentially the agility to respond quickly to your users. But if you don't know where you're going, then basically all you're going to end up with is incrementalism. So to get those disruptive big bets, you really have to stop and really think about where you're going, what's coming next, what's next quarter, the quarter after that, and how does it relate to all the other teams that we're working with. Basically, Twitter's a single service, and so everyone has to connect to everybody else, and so those dependencies are really important too. But that's a challenge in any large organization. It's a challenge for us too.
Okay, great. So I think you've gotten to know the panelists a bit now about what they're thinking about, what their challenges are. I'd love to open the floor up for some questions. So I actually have a closing question that I'm going to leave a bit of time for, which is going to maybe think a bit more strategically what the future's about. But before then, I'd love it if we can pick some of their brains now. So Dan, do we actually have a mic set up? There's a mic right in the back, which is not super convenient. Sounds good. So there's a hand over in the back corner. Why don't you just stand up? Yeah, with the black shirt.
So I got a question for Paul and Steve. You guys clearly have a great portfolio of products, right? And you're from a development perspective and agile team. But how do you get your executives into that mindset? Or are they all already in the agile mindset? And what's your fluid variable? Is your budget fluid, or are you
So I think I'll repeat the question just, if I summarize it quickly, just basically, what do the executives want to see about how the team's working, and what have you done to make them comfortable that the team's, I guess, going in the right direction? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll go first. So again, the financial firms are challenging in that it's a business, right, which needs technology but doesn't always fully understand technology, and so part of the work in our world is to educate them in the right ways, and that's where some of the kind of poo-pooing the agile transformation, that's actually an area where it really paid off dividends in some of our businesses, and where we had this relationship with our business, and that they would give us a requirement, and then 6 months later we deliver something which was 20% accurate, right? So getting them now at the table and understanding that if we're going to deliver the right thing, they're going to have to be there all the time. So that's been a big change. The budgeting is very fluid. We are tied in a lot of ways to meeting certain numbers, but the business is always about, if you really need this to do this thing, we're going to support you. I mean, there are obviously times where that's not the truth, but it is very much a culture of let's just figure out how to get it done. Sometimes we have a breadth of things that we want to do, and sometimes it just gets deprioritized, and we shift the resources around. There's one thing I'd like more of, more fungibility. There's a lot of domain-specific knowledge, unfortunately, in the business, and nuances to product flows and other things, which makes it less achievable to really move the pieces around. But as much as we can get people to kind of think in the same way, and we are, from a business perspective, trying to standardize on certain areas, certain platforms, if you will, and that will certainly facilitate a lot more of the dynamic nature that is really what you want to get to. Because, as I said before, we have to innovate, and we have to deliver faster than our competitors. And being able to have that fluidity is quite important.
So Steve, just following up on that, I think you mentioned that one of the things you did was you actually had a pretty effective team. There's a lot of innovation happening at Twitter, but there's some visibility. So I'm curious about if you can go into any detail, because I think that's what the gentleman was asking, is what do you end up giving to the exec team to make them, I guess, a bit more satisfied about understanding what the strategy is and what's actually happening?
Well, first of all, I'd say it's a great question, because where a lot of companies make mistakes is they go, and we're going to transform the teams, and they forget you have to transform the executive level. That's a really important part. These people have huge power. They have huge influence. They manage resources and staff, as you all well know, and they could make one decision and they can undermine everything that you're doing. So it's a really wonderful world to be in. So, but it's really important that they're not going to transform overnight. Likely, you'll be lucky if you actually find an executive who's already bought into it, and I certainly have worked with some, but most of the time you have to do a transformation of an executive, and that comes sort of one step at a time. But it's putting it in terms that they are interested in. Obviously, they want delivery, and they want it fast, and they want it now. And you have to change the dialogue from make a commitment now to what is the priority of what you want. And that can be a real challenge. It's certainly a challenge. It was a huge challenge at Salesforce, and that transformed significantly over time, and it's a challenge at Twitter too, which is to get people to start thinking about this backlog of priorities, and that we're not committing to everything in this quarter, but we are committing to the priority. So that's what I would recommend is one of the first conversations you want to have with executives is let's talk about priorities. What are your priorities? What are the most important things that you want to get done? And let's worry about when they get done a little bit later. And the teams actually will sort of take care of a lot of that if you get the teams to focus on dogpiling at the top of that backlog. And that's a different problem, and also a very difficult problem to solve, but there are ways, obviously, to solve that. But that's what I would recommend is focus by the way, I wouldn't say coach your executives in a public forum. I would coach them not at your sprint review or any other thing, but one of the things you do want is you want your executives at the sprint reviews, which hopefully all of you do have that. but coach them as to what is the language you want them to speak in that meeting, because everyone's going to listen to it. They're going to listen to what they say to every single team, and if you can get them to change basically the narrative, then teams are going to follow that.
Yeah, I guess to summarize, because I have the luxury of being on the exec at Atlassian, and one of the things I actually brought into the team when I joined is Mike and Scott did not have a backlog. They just went and talked to everyone, and like founders do, is like, we want this and that. And one of the things that we actually brought onto the exec team is we have a backlog like every other team. And the role of a backlog is it forces a conversation, which is, why is that thing above that thing? Like, very simple. No budgeting, no like, how much is that going to cost? But like, why is that thing above that thing? And how many things do we think we can do? So that was like very, very simple stuff. But it's something actually, thinking a company like Atlassian we'd do, but it's something that the teams do when they're building software, but it's a really valuable tool that you can use across your whole management structure as well, which is that simple conversation of what's more important than other things. The other thing that's interesting, maybe, I don't know if I can answer my own questions, but maybe I should, that's fine. So I was being interviewed by the Jira team a couple of weeks ago, and they said, hey, JML, what do you want to see on your Jira dashboard? Imagine you're running a whole engineering team. There must be some cool things. You want to add some features to Jira that would make you happy. And they said, what do you want to see? And I said, there's really only two things I want to see from every team. I want to see what are the top 5 customer value stories that you're building, and I want to see a video of how awesome it is every week. That's all. So focus on what are you building and why, and are you thinking about the customer experience? And then, it'd be great to have a date, but like I want to see continual progress, and I want to make sure the teams are thinking and they prioritize what those 5 top customer features are, and that they're thinking about how they come together as a team. And I said, I don't care about your backlog, or I don't care if you're using Scrum or Kanban, but are you prioritizing? Have you debated what those 5 things are, and are you really trying to, from a product perspective, make them awesome? So, it was interesting from Jira, because I don't really need Jira to do that. I need Jira to run my own team and have a backlog, but I don't really need Jira. I don't want to see backlogs coming up and from teams and like. So that was one question. We have to answer quicker. Our sprints are really slow. So up in the front.
So I got a question on how do you balance between architecture and the actual software development. So dealing with users is great, but sometimes users, their priorities, right? It's the end result. So while you're building the end result, you all of a sudden realize that you've built the wrong framework. Now, convincing the user, well, our priority should really be to change the framework. And they're not going to agree to that, because you still get the same result that we've been working on for the last 2 weeks. You're saying, well, I get no more stories, I get the same story, you just change everything under the covers.
Awesome question. Yeah. So I think the quick summary for the camera is, how do you plan architectural work, whether it be architectural debt or platform investments, when there's no end user, there's no video you can show.
I think what you have to do is you have to find an end user of the architecture. We had that exact problem in early versions of Atlassian Connect, where we were building the framework for Atlassian Connect, but we didn't have any vendors or internal plugins that were actually using it. So we're creating an architecture in a vacuum. No idea whether we're building the right thing, whether it's going to be useful. Do we have the right methods, the right API, the right plugin points? I don't know. It sounds good on paper, right? You have a team coding it, and then you finally get the first person that tries to use it, and you're like, yeah, this isn't so great. So I think that you just need to expand your definition of user as a first step. It's not just end users, the customers that you sell it to. It's anyone that could be using the product. And in the case of an architecture, it's going to be other developers, plugin vendors, the people building in your ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer, but it is a problem we face, and I guess it starts with just having the right relationship. Right, we have a very captive audience for a lot of our software that we write, whether it's the trader sitting next to us or some other business user, and you have to explain and get them to understand that you have to, defer feature A so you can do it the right way, and I don't know, we just try to build up that trust relationship with them and hope that it succeeds most of the time.
It seems like, on the contrary, Twitter's actually been in news as making those investments very well. It's something as a company you almost use as a marketing tool, saying, listen, we're investing in our scalability, we're investing in all that. Do you think that's worked well? Like, is it just the perception you get on the outside, or is it really like those conversations are happening pretty much?
Oh, those conversations are always happening. But I don't know what to really say about that other than we make huge investments in architecture all the time. What you may see on Twitter seems very simple, but there's a huge amount of complexity behind all that to be able to scale it to hundreds of millions of users. And there are many teams that focus almost exclusively on architectural work. But we often do think about the user as like, what is the user going to experience? And there are often application teams also that are on the front end of that. And so we have to work all the way through the stack with multiple teams. And so that's a big challenge at Twitter, of course, is because we have more than 100 teams, and connecting all those teams together. Agile helps us do that, but even beyond that, that's not necessarily a team thing. It's really how do we scale a more agile practice across the entire organization. So that's basically how we do it.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I think you were first with your hand in the back.
I'm back to the previous discussion about someone was asking about, I guess maybe you're summarizing the question. You say you want to see the top 5 stories and then top 5 priorities and visual of that. But to step back further than that, when it comes to setting priorities and to balance against, the CEO or executives and their impact on what your priorities are, how do you justify, say you're probably an epic or something like that, when they want to shift priorities, how technically do you present to the case that this is value higher than whatever, how do you balance out the valuations of these projects?
Okay, so I think is the summary like, I guess as the project is going on, as you're sprinting, and someone wants to derail you, what kind of conversation do you? Okay, so I think the question is, how do you deal with people who are trying to push you off track, I guess, either by taking people or by changing scope, and I guess what kind of conversations? Is there a general toolbox you guys have of how you have those conversations?
Well, we generally go off scope. At the end of the day, we're trying to deliver exactly what the business needs, and priorities change, hopefully not every minute, but they certainly change very frequently. And so there's some work that is regulated, it's mandated, we cannot derail. But you cut another branch and you start working on that thing, and then you come back to the thing you were working on. We're very good at context switching. There's tons of interruptions throughout the day, and if the thing that you were previously working on is that important, then you'll come back to it at another time. So we try to be as dynamic as possible, where we can.
I think one of the most important things is to demonstrate what the cost of not doing this thing is. So, okay, you want this or you want that, but you can't have both. So we'll reprioritize this, and we'll work on this one now instead of that one, assuming you didn't have any technical debt that you were working on at the time. And so then you're giving the executive or whoever it is that's going to make this decision, you just choose one of these two, and we can take either path. If you actually have a good way of operating as a team, and essentially you could make that change very quickly. You could do it in the middle of a quarter. You could do it in the middle of a sprint. There's lots of different ways to do it. But essentially, you've got to put it in terms of what are you going to trade off. But you don't get both.
Yeah. So I think the trade-offs are interesting because we actually started bringing our backlogs to our customers. It was at a previous job. I actually worked for IBM at some point, and IBM was a big black box, and they were wondering why customers are always upset. And I'm like, well, what do you tell customers when they ask for X? Well, we usually say no or thanks for telling us. But what if you showed them your backlog? And they could kind of put it in the backlog with you. And often when you end up doing that, they saw the other stuff. They go, you're working on the right stuff. Like you put it in the right spot. So just being transparent with what your priorities are and show it to someone else, and having that prioritization conversation really helps. So I think I wanted to kind of end the panel. We have 6 minutes with kind of looking forward a bit more. You talked about Agile, now looking at your feet. So if we look at the origins of why there was even a manifesto in the beginning, it was all kind of because of 20 years of software projects being late, running over budgets. I know I was with a company that got acquired by IBM, and the first thing they told us when they hired us is they said, can you help us ship software more than once every 2 years? I was like, wow, that's the bar's pretty low, but you can see why there was definitely like a lot of movement. Software had a really bad rep. And as we were sitting down kind of preparing some of the questions for the panel, we're kind of asking ourselves, like, we've got a huge like the last 10 years or 12 years, a lot has happened in the software industry. So my question for the panel is, imagine we've evolved a lot and actually solved a lot of problems. And even listening to some of your answers, you're like, yeah, it seems like we're in the groove now. We're having good conversations. What do you think are the next set of problems that the next software manifesto is going to try and solve, and why?
I think you put it right when the bar is pretty low. So reading over the Agile manifesto, one of the things it talks about is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And like when you say that out loud, you're like, well, duh, right? Like who would set that as a goal to aspire to? You sort of take that for granted. It's how everyone should be working. But I think if you dig into that customer collaboration, there's a lot of room to expand on there. So the kinds of things that modern software tries to do in the best groups is a lot better than just customer collaboration, right? Someone like YouTube is running thousands of A/B tests over customers every single second of every single minute of every day. That's not just customer collaboration. That's a kind of investigation, experimentation together with the customers. It's more than just having a product owner sitting down in the room and channeling the 200 interviews he had over the past 52 weeks. I think that's probably the next big area for software development, is to bring the customer into the room in a lot more permanent way than previous decade kind of aspired to.
So what I would say is it's all about engagement now. Software was not very engaging in the past, and in the enterprise software world, basically you're trying to sell to a buyer, someone in the company, and once you've sold to that buyer, then everybody has to use it, so you don't have to worry about engagement. But the world has changed. Like everything is about engagement and making our products much more exciting to use and more engaging every second that we're using the product. So to me, it's all about hypothesis, experimentation, and data. So really understanding, putting things into the hands of your customers and let them use the product to do their job, and then get real feedback, real data, not just anecdotal information, I think is one of the real challenges we have from a software perspective. So that's a big tools problem. There's a process problem associated with that. It's a whole bunch of really interesting problems to try to solve to get more and more data about how your users, not what they like about it, but how they actually use the product.
But besides the data, like I understand the kind of scientific approach of you want to observe and measure, and I think there's a bit of science being pushed into there. Like, can you talk about a bit like engagement from a design perspective? Like, how do you see that playing out?
Well, I'm not sure what your question is. What is your question about?
I'm wondering, is there a role for, I guess, more subtle engagement? As in, I feel like the software has a character to it. I feel like it's friendly. It's doing what I want to, as opposed to just, as you said, we can measure it and we can have hypotheses. But how does the design, the designers? There's a huge lean UX, a lot of UX kind of frameworks coming out.
Yeah, I think no matter what, I mean, what we sometimes we forget about is we're actually building this for human beings. We're not building it for robots. So there's a lot of logic, and engineers really think very logically. And there's obviously a very hard problem, which is to make your product much more human. And so we think about that a lot at Twitter, is how do we make this exciting, engaging, and how do we create an emotional experience for our users? So a lot of what we talk about from an engagement perspective is doing exactly that. How can we make this product something somebody wants to use every day, can't wait to use the product? And of course, in our space, the consumer internet, that's really important for us. Hundreds of millions of people decide every day to come to Twitter.
Well, implicit in your question is that Agile is an old hat. Everybody knows how to do it. Can we move on, and what's next? But from what I see, speaking to a lot of people still are actually struggling with the basics. Or even if it's not the basics, I don't think everybody's quite there yet. So I'm not sure if the premise of the question is right to begin with. At the same time, I do think that there is something going forward, and that's we had two questions here, I think, about portfolio management and executive level overview. There is a lot of interesting stuff happening over the scaled Agile framework comes to mind. I don't think this is the last framework that will come up on that angle. So I would say there's definitely interesting stuff coming there on how to scale it.
The first thing is the basics are still useful for a lot of people. Absolutely. So understand the basics. And the other thing is, it seems like the kinds of questions you're getting even from a Jira Agile product is, how do you scale it? How do you scale it from multiple teams, dependencies between teams? I think Steve was saying the same thing. And then how do we get more of the people in the company kind of engaged? It used to be a bit of a skunk's work. You can do whatever process you want, and now it has to be a company effort. Makes sense? And Colin?
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be a big shift. What I'm going to say it sounds like it's going to contradict itself, but I think we need to make software live longer but throw away faster. And whoever's worked at a financial firm understands exactly what I'm saying, because we have software that's 10, 15, 20, 25 years old running. And by live longer, I mean, it's so hard to change software that's 3 years old. Imagine what it's like 10 years old, 15 years old. If we can get the band in which it's still not so bad to change software, then we're going to get a lot more value out of it. But at the same time, we can't hang on to the same darn thing after 5, 7 years. So it's this balance of making the software more sustainable, not sustainable in terms of environmental sense, but sustainable in the sense that I can now make the next change and I'm not scared to death of it, right? But at the same time, realizing that in 5 years from now, who knows what the technology capabilities would be like, and we have to, ignore the sunk cost of all that stuff we put into it, and take the risk and the opportunity of producing something new.
Awesome. Well, listen, I think our sprint's over. We got the nice little light at the front and at the back. So I'd like to thank our panel. I mean, you know what they look like now, so you can stalk them for the next day and a half. I'm sure they'd love to go into a lot more detail about their own experience. And again, thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of the conference.